So, first things first, I know like we've never met before. Where are you located?
I'm in Louisville, Kentucky.
Okay, cool. I'm actually originally from the East Coast as well. I'm kind of staying with family for the holidays in Kansas, but I'm actually from Florida, so I
Mhm.
uh I get being from the South. Um,
Where in Florida are you from?
so South Florida, it's like an hour and a half south of Orlando, like a
Okay.
small town. Yeah,
Okay. I got married in Naples, so my family, like, we always go to Naples like every year for Christmas. That's like our place. So I
nice.
love Florida. I love Naples. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I'm definitely missing it right now because of the cold.
yes, it's
It's
cold.
way too cold here, but you know, you live and you just deal with it. Um, so to get into our topic, I don't know when it was, maybe a few months ago. Like I started seeing your stuff on TikTok, and I was like, wow, okay, this makes sense. Like the way that you talk about, approaching social media and just being multi-passionate. I know that a lot of people these days seem to be using that term, and probably within the last 6 months to a year, I became like more aware of it. So I'm not sure if it's how new it really is, but what would be your definition of a multi-passionate, and like when did you kind of realize that you were in that category?
Yeah, I would say my definition is someone who loves to explore more passions and skills and is more considered a generalist over a specialist. So, someone who is not just a specialist at one thing. They love to learn multiple things. They love to dip their hands in multiple projects. And they may just be someone who loves to explore multiple passions and like learning new things. And I would say for me, it was probably around like 5 years ago. I started my business, Madison Tinder LLC, in 2019, and I was more a social media manager. So I grew a little mini agency in Dallas, Texas, and I pivoted into being a consultant online. And I got bored after a year. I was like, I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I'm only like 23. I shouldn't be bored at what I'm doing. And in that time, I was honestly still trying to find a full time job after getting my master's. So then I was like, what if I just start another business, like for fun? So that's when I started Soulful Scrunchies, which was my e-commerce store that I had for 4 years. I actually let go of it this year because again, I got bored with it. And
Okay.
so like, is something wrong with me? Like, why am I just wanting to do all of these things? And like, why am I getting bored? And someone told me, they were like, you're just very multi-passionate. And I was like, that is me. That is my definition of myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when I started owning being multi-passionate, was about end of 2021. I was running Soulful Scrunchies. I had dropped some events and some retreats. I was just doing like a lot. I was monetizing a lot of things. And I'm not saying like as multi-passionates, you have to monetize everything, but that's kind of what I was doing. Um, and so I just kind of kept juggling multiple things. I think because I would just get bored at doing one thing. So I would just move on to the next. And it would allow me to kind of be in tune with my creative energy. So that's kind of like when I started becoming and owning being multi passionate is the end of 2021. And I started really talking about it in mid 2022, is when I kind of started using the term that people were like, what does that mean? They like did not know what that meant. So I had to do
Mm-hmm.
lots of education around it, but that's kind of when I started working with a lot of multi passionates too.
Okay. So since you work with people on kind of like navigating being multi-passionate, is there scientific research? Like, what are the studies of like how do you think people are born as like multi-passionate? Do you think it's something that they develop over time? Like, what's the deal with that?
Yeah. I think a few things. I don't know if you're into human design. Have you ever heard of human design at
Mm.
all? I think, well, after this podcast interview, you should go look it up. But it's basically like, it's not astrology, but um, it's basically like a quiz that you can take and it identifies what your design is per se, based off like your birth date, where you were born, etc. And I'm a manifesting generator, which when I learned about my human design, it made sense because a manifesting generator is someone who has a lot of ideas, wants to do multiple things, can't stick to one thing, may be a little bit all over the place, may have ADHD, things like that. And then like I work with a lot of mani gens, generators, very multi-passionate. I think people are also like born with it too. I also think it could be like influence from outside situations like your life or like your family doing multiple things, etc. I had my family members stick to one thing, very corporate, very one thing centered. So I was like the one that was a little bit off track.
Mhm.
And I think that more people are just learning and leaning into being multi-passionate because nowadays I think there's just so much that they can do and monetize and don't want to rely on one income source. But yeah, for me it was learning my human design, which is
Okay.
like a whole different rabbit hole situation that you can go down if you please. But it's
Okay.
really interesting to learn about and to kind of like learn about yourself more. I also really studied astrology a little bit. Like I really got into my astrology and my signs and my charts and just got in deep with that. I feel like I learned a lot about myself and why I do certain things and why I think certain things as well.
Hmm. Okay. Well, it's interesting because I was looking up, this is, I'm sure like when you Google multi-passionate, a lot of things come up nowadays, but I was researching like a little bit, Googling earlier today, and but this was like I thought about this before I Googled it and had anybody else's opinion. It seems to me like a lot of specifically entrepreneurs, but also like people that we would consider like brilliant people in history, like inventors, like artists, they all seem to be like multi-passionate type people. And the people that I Googled this morning, the random people that came up was like Steve Jobs, Tim Ferriss, Richard Branson, um, Aristotle, like those are people that like other people would consider in the past like multi-passionate. Um, like would you agree with that? Like do you think that like in the past we just didn't have the term to call these people multi-passionate?
Yeah, I agree. I think that like the term wasn't a thing. Even like when I got into the online space in 2018, like that wasn't really a term. Um, I think a lot of people, like I started really seeing that term come up more in like 2020, like kind of the rise of like TikTok and the shift in social media, I think played a big part in that as well. But I think there's so many people who are multi-passionate or like multi-dimensional or, are more considered a generalist. Like people will kind of call them generalist over specialist, like just not specializing in one thing. But I think so many people are also realizing that sticking to one thing can be a little bit boring. Like from like I just get bored a lot. And I know like a lot of my clients do. I know a lot of people online do. And I think they don't want to rely on one income source, but also just want to be able to dip their hands in multiple projects and be able to do multiple things seamlessly, but also just like to keep themselves fulfilled and entertained and not having to do the same old thing every single day. And a lot of people have done that. Like lots of celebrities have done that. Lots of brands have done that. Unless you have like this one brand that this one product. I saw a post from this guy. I think he was the creator of Quest. I might be wrong, but he was like, you need to pick one thing and do it well and do it for 10 years. And I was like, it's easy for you to say when you have $1 billion company. When
Yeah.
you're like $1 billion company or when you hit the jackpot on this like insane product, that's like all you have to do for the rest of your life, right? But for a lot of people, they have to rely on multiple income streams and want to be able to test and try things until maybe they find the thing that really works out for them and fits with their lifestyle.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, so I'm just thinking about because I know you talk a little like with your people that you work with a lot about approaching social media. Um, yeah, because it's kind of interesting because I feel like maybe people are getting more open to the idea of this multi-passionate being in that category. But it also seems like you're saying, like people who don't get it, it's like there's a little bit of a bad like vibe of like, okay, but you're also just someone who bounces around to like different things. Like I'm just curious, like what would advice would you have for someone who's trying to approach their career and life and kind of move into that and like use that to kind of jump into the next thing? Like what's the best approach
Mhm.
to opening up that category?
Yeah, I think it's just the first thing that I think most multi-passionates have to understand is that you are on a non-linear path and like you have to get over it that you're not on a straight path. I think that a lot of multi-passionates that I work with are scared to have that non-linear path that's very zigzag and up and down, and they try to do something that gets them back on the one path. And then they're completely unfulfilled, right? I always say the thing that you do leads you into the next thing, or like the skill that you learn is going to lead you down like a different path. Like whenever I come out with an idea or make a decision, like sometimes it always leads me into a different direction and I kind of have to follow that and own it. But if I'm like trying to get myself back on the right path, it just never works out, right? Like it's always downhill, or I'm not fulfilled, or I get burnt out, whatever that looks like. I think that you have to own being on a nonlinear path and follow that nudge and your gut, I think is the biggest thing. Because most of the time, like we know the best decision to make and we know what's next for us. And like we see something, we know we should do that. And oftentimes we say no to it or we don't do it. And then that's more like, oh, yeah, we should have done that. We should have executed that idea, started that business, switched into that new career, right? So it's following the nudge and like that intuition, but also owning and being okay with being on a nonlinear path and knowing that, like, multi passionates are not flaky. It's kind of our job to pivot and change things accordingly as we learn new things and as we experience new experiences and kind of frolic on our nonlinear path, but just like being okay and, not thinking, oh, I'm so flaky or I bounce around and, it's a bad thing. It's never a bad thing. That's kind of like what we're meant to do at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that's another thing I do recognize that at least all the people that I would consider multi-passionate that I know personally, they seem to be highly creative people, and they can like also like visionaries where they can see things, whether it's trends that are happening or things about the future, like whether it be creating something like art or a new business. Like they just seem to be able to see stuff that other people cannot, they can't get on board with. They don't get like, oh, this is actually happening right now. Um, so like, have you noticed that? It seems like we're just in touch with things in a way that other people are not. They kind of seem like other people are kind of just like in their own world a little bit more.
Hmm. Yeah, I think multi passions are very innovative. I think
Hmm.
that we always have just like so many ideas and we almost like see different perspectives of things. So, like, kind of like whatever is happening, like, we're always going to be seeing a different perspective of it, or like, very like artsy and creative. Like, we always see the creativeness from the idea or from something happening or seeing like a different perspective of it. And I think like that's really what being the great thing about being multi-passionate. And I was, talking to someone who is also multi-passionate, and it's one of those things that, I think that we're always wanting to innovate. We're always moving first. And I think like being multi-passionate, it's one of those things where we always want to test and be curious. Like we have so much curiosity and we just want to be curious and we want to try and test new things. I think that's what allows us to be innovative and be able to like come up with new perspectives and see the vision behind things because we're kind of always moving first with things because we have tons of curiosity. We're like, what if this works? Let's just try it for fun. Like it might not work. Like the amount of times I've done things where they do not work. It did not work. I just wanted to see what it did. And now I have that experience, that learning experience I can take with me and like that wisdom almost to share with the world.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's the question that I was trying to move towards, that I thought about was, um, on a practical level, like when somebody says, okay, I realize I'm multi-passionate because I've tried a lot of different things, or I have these new ideas that I think I want to do something with. But obviously, everybody, like, depending on where you are in life, you also have to pay the bills. And if you are doing a day job, like, whatever that looks like for you, what would you say is the best way, like when you talk about monetization, like not getting yourself into a hole, but also figuring out how to do your ideas and make them a reality? Like, how would you say making that pivot? Like, how do we best do that without putting ourselves into a bad situation, like on a practical level?
Yeah, I think from a practical level, like, I think you always have to have money coming in some way. You know what I mean? Like whether that's like with your day job or a few side jobs or whatever you're doing, like part-time in your business. But I think the best thing for multi-passionates is making sure you have time and space every day, like an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, however much that is to be working on an idea. Right? Whether like you're in a day job and 9 to 5. Like I see it all the time with like creators on TikTok. They have a 9 to 5 job, but they're, waking up early to create content or filming for brand deals or waking up early to work on their new products. Like they're kind of getting into that idea centric time and like that deep creative work, but they still have that consistency and security with money, right? It's not just like quit everything and do it all. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? You still want to have that security, and like that's kind of what I did with my business. I had that security and I was able to kind of work on soulful scrunchies and execute that idea. I was able to work on my events and retreats and execute that idea. But most of all, I had like the time and space to be able to do that. And I'm not like, wasn't like bottlenecked in my business or like working like 14 hours at a job, right? Like being able to do something that makes you money, but also gives you the time and space and freedom to pursue other passions like at your leisure without being forced to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, and do you think it's, I mean, it's a good with social media and the technology that we have today, um, having something like maybe a YouTube channel or just a big following on social media that can give you income that is somewhat passive, maybe, or brand deals, like you were saying. Like, do you think that's a good idea for people to pursue so that they can have more time to do other
Mhm.
things?
Yeah, I did a TikTok the other day. It was like, if you're multi-passionate, TikTok is a great platform for you because I mean, you're not really Instagram's kind of just like one post a day. It's very like you don't reach a lot of people, but I think on TikTok you're allowed to kind of creatively express yourself more, and be able to, talk about multiple things or put your projects on the internet or be able to connect and build your community. And I think that's very helpful for a multi-passionate, who wants to do multiple things, who wants to get brand deals and like put themselves out there. Because, you could grow pretty great on TikTok as a multi-passionate, being known for multiple things and wanting to pursue other projects and, eventually be able to have more time to do things because you're making money from the app. So I definitely think, being on social media is great for multi-passionates, depending on kind of, what they want to monetize and what their vision is and what creative projects they want to execute. But most of the time, really any creative projects you want to execute, social media will benefit you. And like having an audience and a community who will purchase from you is very important. And I think TikTok is almost like freeing, like almost like a no rules type vibe. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
Instagram is kind of like it has more rules in a sense. So that's my thoughts behind like the yeah, I think social media for multi-passionates is key.
Yeah. Um, well, I'm watching the time, so I don't want to keep you too long. But any last minute advice for somebody kind of new to this world of approaching just like everyday life, social media, on like getting started?
Hmm. Yeah, I think as multi-passionates, like just making sure you're listening to that nudge of like what the idea that you want to pursue. Like oftentimes, like if I have, 3 to 4 ideas in my notes app, I secretly know the one that I want to do, but I just like go back and forth so much because that's how my mind works. Listening to the nudge and also not feeling bad about being multi passionate. I feel like a lot of people feel bad. They're like, oh, I'm flaky. I'm all over the place. Like, I'm not going to be successful because I'm not going to climb the corporate ladder and be like CEO after 25 years at the same company. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
that just might not work out for you as a multi-passionate, and that's okay. Like following that nonlinear path and that nudge. But, really, like I think TikTok's a great platform for multi-passionates who want to like express their art or their creative edge, or, talk about their creative ideas and their perspectives, and just like sharing wisdom on the app. Like you'll be able to monetize yourself and then monetize your projects. And I think that's kind of the order that it goes in, and being able to do what you want to do on the app and have the time to pursue other passions in your own time, which is a great thing with social media. And then, like, I'd always say you don't have to monetize everything as a multi-passionate, but it's okay if you want to, and, be able to diversify your revenue streams. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that makes sense. And also, where can people find out more about you and
yeah.
potentially like working? Because I know you have a website where people can like do consulting.
Yeah. So I have a membership called Multi-Passionate School of Business. It is a membership community for multi-passionates who are entrepreneurs. Focus is kind of on business growth, scaling, visibility, things like that, personal branding. That's a big topic that I talk about. I'm Multi-Passionate Madison on TikTok and Madison.Tinder on Instagram. I'm more on TikTok now with good value. And then I have Out of This Niche podcast that I execute like a podcast every week. Sometimes I skip because I do get bored. So there'll be lots of skipping of the podcast. I'll go like a month of recording and so excited, and then like 2 months of silence, but
Mm-hmm.
it's good. That's what happens.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm kind of in the same boat right now. I'm trying to be more consistent. Uh,
Yeah.
but
It gets
I get that.
hard. It gets hard to like creatively come up with the topics. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Same. I understand. I understand how it goes. Um, well, I appreciate your time coming on and sharing more about being multi-passionate. Yeah, and it's been awesome talking to you.
yeah. Thank you so much for having me.